Some cases truly don't need an introduction, and this is one of them. Sometimes you just need to listen to the story and heed the message. This is a story that's all too common. One of those stories that's a constant reminder to think before you act, because a split-second decision can alter everything.
January 16th, 1998. The world would make way for Kayla VanWert. The place she called home would be Scranton, Pennsylvania, where she would be brought into this world by her mother, Cindy VanWert. As far as a biological father, he wasn't around, but later she would acquire a stepfather. In her early years, she's described as someone who is cheery, someone with a bright smile, someone whose laughter lit up the room. Kayla would be educated in the Scranton public school system, where she enjoyed sports and was also a good friend to those around her. But by the early years of her teenage years, she had gotten into the wrong crowd. She had began getting into trouble. Someone who was normally attentive in class began to wander at the mind. Early on in life, she had gotten good grades, but now she began to slack. They say that trouble in a teenager stems from problems at home. I'm not sure if that's exactly true, but one thing I can say is that Kayla was an open book. She was someone who was straightforward. She would often take to social media just to vent or speak her mind. Kayla would often refer to herself as depressed, someone who was down and out. She would often say that she felt alone, that she felt like no one in her family cared. Aside from that, she would never have anything good to say about her mother. She even referred to her mother as her first bully. Now, make no mistake, I take no pride in talking about the relationship between the mother and the daughter, but these were things that were said out of our own mouth, and it's a part of her story, so I must tell them. When Kayla was just 15 years old, things would take a drastic turn. This would be the year of her life where she would attempt to end it all. I would imagine for Kayla, it was just one of those days where you're at your lowest. And in her moment of vulnerability, she would lend herself to a bottle of pills. She would then be found by her mother, unresponsive, and she would be rushed to the hospital. Luckily, on this day, Kayla would survive, and afterwards, she would find a reason to live. By the age of 16, Kayla would come to find she was pregnant. She was pregnant by a guy named Jorge, someone she had met while she was in school, and they had grown very fond of each other. At this point in her life, Kayla is totally in love. She's head over heels. She would often gloat about how this guy was the one. And although she was young, she was ready and willing to bring their child into this world. Finally, after months of carrying their child, on January 10th of 2015, after 9 hours of labor, they would welcome her daughter, Naomi. When she looked into her daughter's eyes, she became her everything. Kayla is described as a very, very loving mother. By the year of 2016, Kayla would now be 18 years old, and life is hard. She's, after all, a brand new adult, taking care of a child, which she tried her best to do. She would often work odd jobs like Long John Silver's, a job that just doesn't pay enough, and due to her having a child, she was once again falling back into depression. I mean, she wanted to give her child everything, but just couldn't afford to. Just like earlier in her teenage years, she would begin to fall back into a depression. She would begin taking to social media again, saying that life was hard and she'd had enough. About that guy, Jorge, the one who she claimed was the love of her life, well, at this moment in time, they're having problems. They're constantly bickering. You know, the normal. Breaking up, getting back together, and things were just tumultuous. When you look at her posts, it's honestly like deja vu from the earlier days. She's once again saying that no one cares and she's struggling, she's down and out, and she's trying to find a way through. But this time, things were getting a little darker. She was actually saying she was ready to go again, that she'd had enough of this world, and she was ready to go to heaven to be with her aunt. But although she would say these things, she would remind herself that she had a daughter to take care of, and she would once again find the strength. But although she had the will to live on, little did anyone know that 2016 would be the last time they ever saw her. For Kayla, her pain would be over, but it would only be transferred to the ones who loved her. May 29th, 2016. Scranton Police Department would be dispatched to the 800 block of McKenna Court, located in Scranton, Pennsylvania. At this time, the officers are responding to a call about an altercation between two females. The officers would arrive on the scene, but by the time they showed up, it was empty, outside from a couple of witnesses. By now, 18-year-old Kayla VanWert has been rushed to the hospital, suffering stab wounds. This is now turned into an investigation. The witnesses on the scene, well, they didn't tell much. They merely said they saw a fight, someone was injured, and that was the end of it. And one of the other witnesses happened to be the person whom Kayla was living with, an older woman who goes by the name of Roxanne. But she would tell the authorities that Kayla told her to hold her phone. She went outside and that she never returned. While some of the officers are collecting statements, the detectives are on the scene analyzing it. They would notice that there were a few drops of blood, but there was also a broken knife, and this was also located in an alley. Meanwhile, Kayla is at the hospital fighting for her life, but sadly, around 10 p.m., she would lose this battle, and she would ultimately be pronounced deceased. The authorities now know they have a culprit on the loose, and they're actively searching for this person. But it wouldn't take long. The girl whom she had the altercation with would quickly be identified as then 16-year-old Kathleen Boyer. It wouldn't take long after the altercation for her to be behind bars. Now, when she was initially booked in, she would be booked in on assault charges, because at this point in time, the authorities are waiting for an official autopsy report. The medical examiner would finish up, and the verdict would be in. They would rule her death homicide. Due to the circumstances surrounding the case, the acting prosecutor would decide to charge Kathleen as an adult, which leads to the next question. What was their connection? Well, Kayla and Kathleen at one point were friends. In fact, those around them testify they were good friends. But then something would happen. Kayla would begin to suspect that Kathleen was messing with her boyfriend, Jorge. Needless to say, that this would ruin any relationship, and the friendship would quickly sour. Two girls that were once friends were now opposing enemies over a common interest. The feud would begin with Kayla going to Kathleen's inbox and confronting her. They would then begin to argue. For the next few months, things would be extremely rough. Kayla and Kathleen would get into several physical altercations. It would always end the same way. They would do their thing, and then they would walk their separate ways. But what was different on May 29th of 2016? Well, there was a series of events. On that day, Kayla had been arguing with her baby's father, Jorge. But on this day, Jorge would put his hands on her. He would strike her with the baby in her hand, and he would also pull her by her hair. Jorge would then be arrested and taken to jail because he was already out on bond for an incident that happened in March. Having contact with Kayla was against his bond conditions. After he goes to jail, Kayla then contacts Kathleen and they began arguing online. Seeing that Kayla contacted Kathleen minutes after her boyfriend was arrested, we all know what the argument was about. This love triangle. The two girls argue for a minute, and then they agree to meet up in an alleyway to settle their differences. Like deja vu from earlier days, they would begin to exchange hands, but Kayla would begin to get the best of her. In fact, Kayla would end up on top. But while this was transpiring, Kathleen decided to take it another direction. She would pull a whip. She would then strike Kayla in the neck area, as well as the chest area. The impact would cause the knife to break, and she would throw it down in the alleyway. And while Kayla was suffering, she would decide to make her getaway. This is where the story gets weird, because then an unidentified male would carry Kayla out of the alleyway. He was never identified. I can only assume he's the man that took her to the hospital. A witness would tell authorities that minutes after Kayla was carried away from the alleyway, an SUV would pull up, and a guy wearing a red shirt with gold and silver chains would get out, and he would take something from the alleyway. In the same time span, they would say that 5 other people pulled up, and they were searching the alleyway with flashlights. They would search for a second, and then they would leave. When Kayla ultimately lost her battle at the hospital, Kathleen would get word of it, and she would run home. She would even post to her Facebook after the incident. She would simply post, "I'm wrong. I'll admit it, and I'm gonna turn myself in. But it is what it is at the end of the day. Gotta face the consequences. No remorse." Well, Kathleen Boyer, the girl with no remorse, she would have her day in court, and she would decide to show up and plead guilty on basically a plea deal, where she would receive anywhere from 7 to 20 years behind bars. Kathleen would get exactly what she signed the dotted line for, 7 to 20 years. But is it really justice? Because during the course of this investigation, authorities would recover messages in Kathleen's inbox where she was talking to one of her friends before the altercation. In these messages, Kathleen would make mention that maybe she should just stab her, which basically handed the prosecution a charge of first-degree murder. But that's not what she's charged with. The terms of her plea deal was that she would be able to plead guilty to third degree and call it a day, which means she would ultimately be handed a second chance at life. But Kayla wasn't. Kayla was sentenced to a life sentence inside of a coffin. She even left behind her 1-year-old daughter, Naomi, who will now be raised without a mother.
A high schooler will serve time behind bars for the murder of a teenager in Lackawanna County. Kathleen Boyer of Scranton was sentenced today to 7 to 20 years in prison. In July, she pleaded guilty to third-degree murder in the stabbing death of Kayla VanWert.
As far as Kathleen, she's still serving her sentence. She occasionally posts to her Facebook, just updating her prison photo. But one year, in the year of 2021, she would post a message. The message would read, "Words can't even begin to describe how I feel. Most would say or think that I'm a cold-hearted person, but I'm filled with pain, shame, and guilt every day of my life, knowing the circumstances of what transpired. I care more than anyone will ever know. My intentions were never for things to get as far as they did, and I'm sorry, extremely sorry, how the situation was handled. To everyone I hurt in the process of my actions. Every day I wish I handled things differently and can change the past, but I can't. As much as I would like to, I wouldn't want my worst enemy to feel the way that I do. Do I deserve consequences? Absolutely. I never once doubted that for a second. One situation doesn't define who you are as a person. I cry. I grieve. As much as anyone else has or ever will. It's been 5 years today, and it still feels like the moment it happened, so I can't even imagine the pain I caused her family and friends. I just want to say that I apologize from the bottom of my heart. I just want everyone to know that it has changed me as a person also, and that I feel emotions that people don't think I feel, and that I would never allow my pride to get in the way of telling everyone how I've been feeling after all these years. Whether or not she's truly remorseful, it's not for me to judge, because although she did a heinous act, she was young. She was 16 years old, but at the same time, 16 years old is good and well, old enough to understand right from wrong. And I'm personally a true believer of an eye for an eye. If you take a life, you deserve to spend your life behind bars. But I'm not the judge, I'm not the jury, and I'm not a prosecutor. What's done is done, and people just have to live with it. What happened to 18-year-old Kayla VanWert is truly heartbreaking. She was someone who suffered from depression, someone who even tried to end it all herself, only for someone else to do it for her. But to add insult to injury, this all transpired behind someone that she loved. If you're watching this story, let this be a learning experience. No man or no woman is worth it, because in the end, things can get out of hand, as you've seen in this story. And once you reach the point of no return, that's it. Rest in peace, Kayla VanWert. Thank you for being a light for others.
Today in Scranton, McKenna Court, remembering Kayla, who I know is standing right there. She is with us. Father, we ask that you protect her friends, her family, her daughter, of most of all. She was a great mother. She had a great personality. She made everyone smile when they were having a bad day. Father, again, we're asking that you protect her daughter and her family and her friends.
We love you, Kay.
Love you,
baby.